Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at the Iron Crucible, exploring how a single, localized spark ignited a global cataclysm that literally rewrote human history. The Great War was an event of such staggering magnitude that we're still feeling its shockwaves today. It transformed the European continent into, well, a mechanized slaughterhouse. We're going to look at exactly how and why this happened and the fractured world it left behind.
To help us wrap our heads around this massive topic, we'll follow a quick 6-part roadmap. The Spark and the Illusion, Gridlock and New Terrors, a truly global war, blockades and fresh troops, the final offensives, and finally, a fractured, unstable peace. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The Spark and the Illusion. It's wild to think about how a volatile mix of secret alliances and imperial ambitions perfectly set the stage for disaster. Think about how fast the dominoes fell here. It all traces back to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. That one isolated spark triggered the July crisis, completely shattering the diplomatic balance in Europe. And then, within a dangerously short window, these major empires were activating their armies by the millions.
But here's the real tragedy of it all. As the troops marched off, the empires mistakenly believed they were embarking on a swift, glorious campaign. People were actually boasting it would be over by Christmas. It was a profound illusion, and it was about to crash headfirst into a brutal, mechanized reality.
That brings us to Section 2, Gridlock and New Terrors.
The grim reality of this conflict really showed its face on the Western Front. Instead of swift victories, armies found themselves rapidly ensnared in a brutal, uncompromising stalemate. They literally had to burrow into the earth just to survive. It created this deeply scarred, paralyzed landscape, stretching all the way from the Swiss border to the North Sea.
Imagine the day-to-day for millions of soldiers. They were trapped in this intricate labyrinth of waterlogged trenches. Daily life was just the constant, deafening terror of artillery bombardments, plus rampant disease. And worst of all, the agonizing dread of going over the top, knowing you'd be forced to charge directly into a relentless hail of machine gun fire. This claustrophobia fundamentally shifted the entire nature of human warfare.
So how do you break a gridlock like that? Well, it triggered an incredibly aggressive technological arms race. Desperate to gain an edge, armies started introducing terrifying new instruments of mass destruction. You had early combat tanks rolling out specifically to crush barbed wire. Aircraft took the fighting up into the skies for the first dogfights. Heavy artillery was now capable of leveling entire cities. And perhaps most horrifyingly, chemical weapons like mustard gas were deployed to literally choke out life in the muddy trenches.
Moving on to Section 3. A truly global war.
We really have to contrast the two major fronts to grasp the sheer scope of this. While the Western Front was defined by that claustrophobic labyrinth of waterlogged trenches and mechanized gridlock, the Eastern Front was a vastly different kind of horror. Over there, you saw massive, sweeping movements of troops stretching across thousands of miles of vast Russian terrain, battling brutal winter conditions and severe supply shortages. And those brutal conditions in the East triggered massive political upheaval. The sheer scale of the fighting completely decimated the Russian, German, and Austro-Hungarian armies. For Russia, the strain was just too much. It broke the back of the autocracy entirely and directly triggered the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. The war was literally toppling empires from within.
But the empire still standing? They pulled in everything they had. The British and French mobilized vast resources, drafting hundreds of thousands of colonial troops from Africa, India, and Australasia. Campaigns were launched far from Europe, striking into the Middle East against the Ottoman Empire. This expansion transformed distant, ancient landscapes into fields of unprecedented carnage. Think of places like Gallipoli. It was truly a world war in every sense of the word.
Section 4. Blockades and fresh troops.
Meanwhile, out on the oceans, critical maneuvers were happening that would finally break the gridlock. The British Royal Navy was enforcing a suffocating blockade on Germany. Getting desperate, the German command unleashed unrestricted submarine warfare. That aggressive strategy, combined with the explosive interception of the Zimmermann telegram, that secret note urging Mexico to invade the U.S., well, it finally forced the United States to abandon its neutrality and enter the conflict in 1917.
And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. The U.S. injected fresh troops and immense economic might into the war. It was the exact lifeline the exhausted, depleted Allied lines desperately needed to finally turn the tide.
This brings us to Section 5, the final offensives.
By 1918, the massive weight of this global mobilization comes to a head. Knowing the tide was turning, Germany launched one final, desperate spring offensive. But under the weight of stubborn Allied resilience and the arrival of those fresh American forces, it collapsed. That paved the way for the decisive 100 Days Offensive. The Central Powers were pushed to total collapse, which finally forced an armistice, silencing the guns on November 11, 1918.
Our final section, a fractured, unstable peace.
The guns fell silent, sure, but the 1919 Treaty of Versailles definitely did not bring a harmonious peace. The geopolitical map of the world was entirely rewritten. Four of the greatest, most historic empires in human history, the German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires, were completely dissolved. Just gone.
But it's the human cost that truly defines this era. Over 20 million people dead. Let that staggering number sink in for a second. The scale of this loss birthed what became known as the deeply traumatized lost generation. An entire demographic of youth just wiped away by mechanized slaughter.
And what did the survivors inherit? A ruined world. The treaty left behind a highly unstable geopolitical landscape, absolutely rife with economic devastation, and a deep, simmering, bitter resentment among the defeated nations. The peace process didn't really heal the wounds. In many ways, it merely bandaged over them. Which leaves us pondering this haunting final question. Did the Treaty of Versailles actually end the Great War, or did it merely pause it? Knowing that this fractured peace directly sowed the seeds for an even darker, more destructive global conflict just 20 years later, it really forces us to rethink everything we know about how wars actually end. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.